já porque enquanto você fica muito cansado de curso.
I just wanted to say hi. Hi, Charles. Alex. Hi, Christian. Alex. Lisa. Christian. Lisa.
Hi.
Alex. Sarah. Sarah.
Sorry.
Well, of course, we want to begin by thanking everyone for being here. It's really an honor to participate in this case, and we've worked really hard over the past 48 hours. We're really excited to present you what we've come up with. So, I want to begin with just a little history lesson. In 1798, an economist by the name of Thomas Malthus published a paper on land use in Europe, and essentially what he predicted was that Europe was going to run out of arable land to use to grow food. And the population was rising, we don't have enough land. Doomsday scenario, everybody's going to die, this is it. Pack your bags, move to Asia. It sounds a little familiar if you've watched the news anytime in the past 5 years, doesn't it? Talking about climate change, rising ocean levels, ocean acidification, the Great Barrier Reef is dying. It's another doomsday scenario, isn't it? But hang on, Europe's still around, isn't it? Europe's still there. I was there a week and a half ago. There's plenty of food. What happened? Thomas Malthus failed to account for an economic variable called total factor productivity. And for a non-economist, basically what that means is he didn't account for technological innovation. Basically, people figured out how to grow more food in the same area of land. And essentially, this is what ecotech is facilitating today. Ecotech is the facilitator, the networker, that is enabling these clean tech type technologies to increase total factor productivity in these, especially energy spaces, and decouple energy usage and other things like that from economic productivity. And this is one of the key things. So, I mean, when you boil it down, what we're really talking about in the room today is saving the world. And ecotech, what we want to do is to help you be the key player in this revolution as it continues. So let's get started. Oh, if my clicker will work. There's always got to be a tech problem, right? So we're going to propose and elucidate an ecosystem framework of analysis for understanding the ecotech cluster and its key challenges. In our view, a variety of constraints within this ecosystem framework are principally responsible for these challenges. That is to say, ecotech isn't responsible, it's rather the environment that ecotech is in. And then we're going to make the case that ecotech is uniquely positioned to move the needle and change some of these variables in such a way to create an ecosystem that's self-sustaining. So we're going to propose a cocktail of key operational objectives that ecotech can implement to overcome and reorient these ecosystem constraints. Then we're going to go on in sort of part two to examine the changing role of ecotech's managers as they move through this cluster life cycle transition, from early middle stage to late middle stage. And then we're going to propose a battery of key strategic objectives to ensure that ecotech, and not just the cluster, but ecotech itself, maintains long-term competitive solvency. So there's this roadmap if you're looking for it. The only thing I haven't mentioned yet is we're going to conclude with a summary of those key findings. Okay, so this is the ecosystem framework we're going to propose. And this is an original idea. This is something we've been working on for the past 48 hours. It was sort of inspired by the circular flow model in macroeconomics, if you know it from your first macro class when you were 19. But this is it. So we identified the key players, Ecotech, the members of the Ecotech cluster, the government, and the entrepreneurs and investors that are involved. And then we're going to show how the interactions in the system work. Ecotech facilitates connections to the rest of the ecosystem for its members. The members transfer their knowledge and gain first customers from act as first customers for entrepreneurs and investors that move into the system. The entrepreneurs and investors create jobs and pay taxes to the government, and then the government funds and supports Ecotech. So that's our counterclockwise circular flow that's happening. There's another one that goes clockwise. Ecotech proposes policies to the government. The government institutes those policies to create an attractive environment for entrepreneurs, investors, and companies that want to grow. These entrepreneurs and investors create synergies, supply chain efficiency, and new opportunities for Ecotech's members, who then propose initiatives and, of course, pay fees to Ecotech. Now, the thing I want to point out at this point in the analysis is that all of these relationships are positive. They're all positive correlations. So when you increase the efficiency or the speed or the volume of any one of them, it has a downline domino effect that increases the speed and efficiency of everything else. So this is how a system like this grows organically from the inside out. Now, right now it's just a circle, but the thing that makes Ecotech really interesting in this space is that they're the only one that's connected to everybody. They provide support and networking for new entrepreneurs and investors in the space, and then of course these entrepreneurs and investors join the cluster and increase the network value of the cluster itself. So this is our jumping off point, and we're going to use this framework to kind of elucidate our solutions moving forward. Just as an aside, obviously we don't exist in a vacuum here. This isn't the only cluster in the world. There are external institutions as well. This would be the model for how they interact. It's going to become important later. Just be aware that we're also aware of it. Okay, so moving into section 2. What are these key success factors, and what are the causes of Ecotech's challenges, and how do we solve them? This is important information, right? You excited about this? Good. All right, so we found some research from really interesting research, Mr. Kamath at California State University, who identified key success factors for clusters. And he came up with a list. There are a lot of them. We identified 4 that we think are really important for the success of Ecotech. They are the government public policy, and that sort of goes with socio-political climate, the presence of leading anchor firms, the availability of capital, both for new investors and also for existing companies that want to grow, and then the presence of market demand. That doesn't necessarily mean Montreal market demand, but at least it means access to demand in markets wherever they happen to be. He also identifies key failure factors. There are a couple that are important, but we see them as sort of being linked to the key success factors, so we're going to keep our framework of analysis on KSFs without KFFs really involved. Okay, so every case that we had to read, and almost all of the research that we did outside of the cases, identified the availability of capital as the principal problem that clean tech startups and companies are facing. You know, it's not just a bottleneck for these companies, it's a chokehold. It's stopping them from being what they could be. So that seems like an interesting problem to solve. So debt financing and VC investment are both kind of hard to get. So let's think about why. Why is that? Why don't banks want to invest in clean tech startups? Well, essentially, it's because they don't have the data to calculate the risk beta for these companies. And if we've got finance guys in the room, you're already with me. If you're not a finance guy or gal, the risk beta is like the credit score of the company, right? And we can't calculate the credit score until we have, usually it's at least 40 examples of a success and 40 examples of failure. That's what you need to get statistical significance in this space. And clean tech is so new that no one bank has any data on these startups. They can't calculate the credit risk. It's a big problem. And for institutional investors as well, clean tech startups are perceived as too risky. VC investment is limited for a couple reasons. One of them is that VCs tend to prefer investing in the United States for a variety of reasons. One of them is the fact that the GDP is 16 times higher than it is here. And the other is that VCs tend to only focus on bottom line. They're making all of these extremely risky investments, and they demand an extremely large return. That doesn't always exist in the clean tech space. Would you be excited to hear about solutions to both of these problems?
Yeah, sure.
Great. So we're gonna propose guaranteed government loan programs, and we'll get to that. Sponsorship of an underwriting research group to help elucidate what this risk beta really ought to be in the clean tech space, And then targeted networking for ecotech with double bottom line or triple bottom line or impact investors, and then of course also Canadian-focused VCs to overcome some of those challenges. So here's this is one of the key things that we're going to talk about today, and it's going to relate to some of the stuff we talk about later as well. You're the government, right? You got $3 million, and you want to give it to clean tech startups. One of the things you can do is offer grants. The companies apply for a grant, and you hand out $1 million to 3 companies. It's a risky space. Let's say 2 of them fail, 1 of them succeeds. So you've paid $3 million, and 1 company has succeeded. It seems like there ought to be a better way to do that. So rather than handing out grants, the government essentially, in the framework, the government essentially co-signs for loans, and what that does is it changes the entire beta calculus that the banks go after. You would much rather have the government guaranteeing this loan than a clean tech startup, right? And that's, I think, pretty intuitive to a lot of people. So rather than grants, 3 companies each get a $1 million loan. 2 of them go bankrupt, 1 of them succeeds. The government doesn't need to pay back the loan for the one that succeeded. They pay it themselves. They do have to pay for the 2 that failed, but for $2 million of costs to the government, we've funded 3 projects. We've put out $3 million worth of funding for clean tech startups. And this way we can leverage the budget that already exists and maximize the number and variety of projects that get funded. This is not a new idea. The place where this happens the most as a percentage of GDP is Germany. That's a group called KFW. The USA poster child for this project is Solyndra. They were in the news a lot like a year and a half ago. There was like a trade war with China. It was crazy. But they just wound up in the black like 2 weeks ago. This was in the news. Solyndra is now making money for the first time. And surprise, surprise, this is not a new concept in Canada. The Canadian Small Business Financing Program and the Canadian Agricultural Loans Act both provide exactly this type of financing for startups in those spaces and expansions in those spaces within Canada. So the benefit, what we're getting at here is that this is not, it's not hard. It's something that public policymakers are already familiar with, and the only challenge is showing to them that the positive health externality that these clean tech companies come with is worth this type of program. So we think that's really promising. If we go back to our framework, we're in doing this, we're increasing this circular flow and this positive feedback loop on the right-hand side of our graph of our framework. The Ecotech Quebec increases its credibility and context and ability to influence the government in the future, and then the government creates more opportunities for entrepreneurs and et cetera. You see how that works. It's a domino effect. As those linkages strengthen, the ability to affect policy changes in the future also strengthens. Okay, I'm out of breath, so I'm going to hand it over now to Christian. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Charles, as well. Another solution and a way forward for ecotech, we have found out that ecotech should really target what we call impact investors. So we know that venture capitalists normally they go after high returns for taking high risk. The thing about clean tech companies is that many of them, they don't necessarily offer high returns. Instead, they have what we call a health externality. So they potentially they can solve the problems of the world. They can make the world greener. And some investors have found out this and found that these clean tech companies would be interesting to invest in. We have mentioned some of them here, and we really think that ecotech needs to target these investors and make them a part of also their branding campaign. What we see here is also the framework that if we have more investors, we will get more members. We will have more power to ecotech, which again will give us more investors. So it's like a dynamical circle that flows naturally within the ecosystem. Okay. Also, to boost the presence of market demand, we have identified both some constraints and some solutions. First of all, we have seen that we see here in Canada that there is not necessarily anything in the IP protection legislation that offers something better than in Europe or in the United States. So there's no natural incentive for the foreign companies to come to Canada and do their business here or to Montreal because of the IP protection. This can be a problem for ecotech cluster to really grow. Another problem is the barriers to trade here. So if we have a company here in Montreal that wants to go to India, they will see a lot of problems, for example, because the things, everything can be written in English, in Indian. They will experience maybe a lot of trade barriers, which can also be cultural and language-wise. Possible solutions to this is that Ecotech could maybe try to connect to firms or risk pooling insurances and facilitate this contract. So facilitate the contact between the developers who needs IP protection legislation and the people who can give this protection or can insure them in this protection. Another thing is that Ecotech needs to really maybe do more lobbying for changing the legislation here in Canada to increase the IP protection for companies here. Okay. Yes, and then also another important fact is that companies that want to go international, for them it's maybe more easy to go to countries where there is a cultural proximity. So there is not necessarily a language barrier, for example, which will make it more easy for them to do trade. And from there, they can expand to internationally by indirect linkages. Okay, we did a lot of research, and a lot of research shows that entrepreneurs, developers, they are really interested in intellectual property legislation. This is something that's very important for them. So that's why we also think this solution is very important and something that Ecotech really needs to consider. Also that, as I said, like it would be more easy for Ecotech companies to find or to do business in regions or in countries where there is a cultural proximity. So they need to go there first, and afterwards they need to expand. Possible partners and could be like Air Liquide, Meronome, EDF, and countries like that. Furthermore, Montreal is an international city, so they have a lot of leverage. Maybe Ecotech needs to tap into that and use this as a competitive advantage to attract companies. So what we see here is like with external solutions, like for example an IP protection strategy, they will really foster or boost the ecosystem. So it's like imagine yourself having a plant that you put water in. That's the same kind of thing. The IP protection strategies solutions could be like the water on the plants. Yes.
Thanks, Christian. So I'm quickly going to move to the very important topic of leading anchor firms. So what do we see is that Ecotech needs anchor firms and networking connections. You already have companies like Hydro-Quebec, AirX, but you need more. At the same time, what do we see is that artificial intelligence has created a hub in Montreal. The industry is growing in this part of Canada. So why not venture into the artificial intelligence sector and create a transaction between artificial intelligence and clean tech industry? So what do we propose as a solution is that you invest more or have more kind of investment coming into the fab labs, into the live labs where local communities and new entrepreneurs can develop new ideas, create prototypes, and make the industry more dynamic. What do we see from this global embeddedness axis? We see that Ecotech Quebec has good horizontal integration, but at the same time there is lack of vertical integration. So if there is a good mix of horizontal and vertical integration, then this creates a good equilibrium for Ecotech cluster to grow. A very big problem, government policies and regulations. So what we have seen is that government keeps coming and going and government tries to place with the rules. One of the examples is the river turbine that has experienced this kind of problem. At the same time, the rules that are existing, they don't really understand where to put. The government really doesn't understand how to apply to this new niche industry. So what is the solution that we are proposing? Coach the firms to look for markets that are overseas. For example, in the case of river turbine, it was India where they could find a new market to succeed because the regulations were not severe over there. At the same time, make America great again, reduce the taxes, find opportunities over there. This is a good opportunity for a ecotech cluster to grow over there. So I'm going to hand over quickly to my friend Iti. Thanks.
Okay, so this is just a circular diagram that we've been discussing, which has been discussed by my colleagues. So I'm just going to take you through section 3, which is going to talk about cluster life cycle analysis and the changing role of ecotech in general in the clean tech industry. So we want to place ecotech on this cluster life cycle. So we realize that ecotech, the role of the managers is changing in ecotech, and which is why we want to place ecotech, in the transition phase between going from latent cluster towards the working cluster, which is quite there. And like looking at this table, you might realize some of the basic parameters that you want to look into, which are important for latent cluster and working cluster. I'm just going to pick up one parameter to explain why we've actually placed it over there. So, we realize that in latent cluster, like the managers from latent clusters are actually, basically involved into increasing the networking between the members. Whereas in working cluster, like the managers are actually building the credibility, business, strategy level, and we believe that ecotech should actually invest in formulating a business level strategy. So, which is why we see them in this transition phase going towards working cluster. To actually do that, we need a strategy. So we've actually used a business model, which is this strategic group analysis. I'm just going to explain, like these are various ecosystems which are available all over the globe. So we see that Japan and South Africa are, we realize that they are geographically isolated, so they're towards the left of the axis. USA is kind of an outlier because, since we've used turnover of the clean tech industry against the GDP of that country, so it's in a class apart of its own, so it has a different group. And the European cluster that we see in the middle, it's actually, it's strong enough, but it's actually lacking any competitive advantage. And we see a smaller cluster towards the right-hand side, which is Sweden and Czech Republic. Like this cluster is actually, has small number of firms, which is quite contrary to this cluster, which is Canada and Spain, which has large number of members, but actually, the financial viability is, below average. That's the basic problem. And of course, we see Denmark as, best strategically located on the map, and definitely like ecotech, which is the Canadian ecosystem, should try to move towards this. So this is our suggestion. And we want to understand one thing definitely, like why Canada is actually towards the left-hand side of the axis. So the basic reasoning that we found from this Canadian clean technology firm report from 2011 to 15, like the lot of factors actually which are influencing, but we just wanted to pick one. Like retained earning was like on a downfall, and there are various reasons for that. Like new firms are actually at the negative ROCE, so that kind of impacts the retained earning, and also the existing members, like they have to invest more on the R&D because this kind of industry is actually looking for innovation. So that kind of investment is actually placing Canada, that the thing I was talking about, in this part of the axis. So of course we need a strategy. We need to define which strategy we are, really proposing for ecotech. So this is the Porter's model that we've used, and we realized that ecotech is actually catering to a narrow market, and the customer value is quite distinctive. So we want to actually focus and suggest that ecotech should actually focus on this strategy, which is focus differentiation. So, and how do we actually implement the strategy? We are going to establish by Blue Ocean strategy, which Charles is going to explain.
Right, so anytime after 2005, if you're going for focused differentiation, you're reading Blue Ocean strategy. And so we're going to try to apply that framework, which was published by Harvard Business Review 2005, to ecotech situation. And the idea here is that we want to break the value-cost trade-off so that we can create something truly interesting to entrepreneurs, investors, players in the clean tech industry, so that they'll want to move to Montreal, so you'll have a different sort of product offering, as it were, as you're trying to attract the best and the best of the best in this industry. So how does it work? All right, so we identify potential sources of strategic advantage, and the ones that qualified from our list in the end as having all four of these characteristics are the following. That cluster partnership with the AI group in Montreal obviously is second to none in the world. These government loan programs will give you something that very few others in clean tech cluster, in terms of clean tech cluster, have. These leading anchor firms that you have here, like Hydro-Québec, are a good source of competitive advantage, but we think probably not quite enough. The availability of capital as it improves with this new networking of government loan program focus. The presence of unique suppliers. We were thinking here wood, though I guess they have that in Sweden as well. And the density of these inter-firm cooperative linkages, which of course is ecotech. That's the ecotech advantage there at the bottom. That's where you come in as being not only having a strategic, but being your own source of strategic advantage. Kind of interesting. All right, so how do you do Blue Ocean strategy? It's a long story, but essentially what you do is you look at what do people actually care about, what costs me much, what am I paying too much for, investing too much time in, that people don't actually care about in terms of my product offering. And we have some papers that we'd be happy to give you that actually ask this question of tech startups, not clean tech, but tech startups. And one of the things that we found was the presence of related industries is just not something that they're interested in at all. When the entrepreneur is choosing a place to found their company, this isn't a factor that they consider. So we can totally eliminate that. That's something you have in Montreal, that it doesn't need to be part of your positioning, it doesn't need to be part of your branding anymore, because you don't get any reaction. You can also reduce your communication in terms of presence of competitors. The leading wisdom here is the competitors, there will be knowledge spillover, but what we found is that entrepreneurs don't actually care. The things that you do need to raise in order to become competitive are the availability of capital, these inter-firm linkages, the presence of suppliers because of shipping costs, and of course these anchor firms. And then we're going to suggest that you extend your value curve by creating this AI cluster partnership and these government loan programs. Just because I realize I skipped a step here, if you're not familiar with Blue Ocean strategy, we call this the strategy canvas. It's those lines are called value curves, and basically you take all of these things that are important to consumers that cause them to make these decisions, and then you compare companies' product offerings and how well they do along these variables. So the top line, that red line there, is the clean cluster from Denmark, which is our benchmark, and the bottom line is ecotech. The middle line there is just an average of the two to give you an idea visually of how far apart they are. And so after we eliminate, raise, reduce, and create, what we wind up with is an entirely different strategy canvas, just to give you the visual comparison there. You see that the area underneath ecotech's curve has increased, which means they're offering more value, and they're also, both because it's raised higher, and also because it's extended to the right. So by offering these three things that are added in case you can't read, that presence of the AI cluster and the partnership with them, the government loan program, the government loan programs that we are proposing, and then this IP defense strategy in linking firms up with IP defense insurers. It's going to give you something that the Denmark Clean Cluster doesn't have, and three things there that are extremely important to entrepreneurs and as they're choosing a place to found a company. I don't need to tell you your own KPIs, but one thing we wanted to point out here is that if your strategy is to overtake Denmark, if you want to be the clean cluster, the clean tech cluster, you need to benchmark yourself not against the industry average, but against Denmark, right? We're shooting for Denmark. We're trying to move you across that strategic mapping group. So if you're not beating Denmark along your KPIs, then you're not succeeding. Okay, so just to summarize, I know we're a little low on time. I wanted to go more in depth into this matrix here. But just to quickly summarize, along the side there we have the key problems that we found for ecotech, and along the top we have some of the solutions that we proposed. The only thing that I really want to get across with this graph or with this matrix is that even if you don't implement all of our initiatives, or even if several of them fail, there's a lot of crossover between the solutions that or the problems that they solve, and that's the value of taking this ecological perspective and approaching in approaching solving your problems, right? Is that once you identify the constraints, you can find the factors that underlie those constraints, and then you can attack them rather than just sort of stabbing in the dark to try to find a solution to these problems. So that's not what I rehearsed, but I think you got it, right? So in conclusion, Ecotech is well positioned to overcome these sort of minor operational challenges and continue to move forward in its development and growth. By leveraging their influence on public policy and reorienting ecosystem constraints, Ecotech possesses the capacity to maximize the growth of the ecosystem to which they play steward. As the hub of the network that could develop these solutions for some of Earth's biggest problems, we hope that Ecotech will mobilize its growth to formulate and implement socially responsible strategy for the entire cluster, but also for Ecotech. With these objectives in mind, Ecotech, we really think, is very well positioned to become a global leader in the clean tech space. Thank you all very much for your attention. I hope you found it flattering. And now, of course, we'll be happy to take some questions.
Okay, I'm going to start with one question about the leading anchor firms, and you talked about the vertical integration, that how we should. So the question is how you say it. How, because a vertical integration works if you have an integrator. However, in our cluster, in our sector, it's about clean tech and it's very diverse. So how do you see it working?
One of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about over the past 48 hours that didn't really make it in its most robust form into the final presentation was this need that we think we've demonstrated with the Blue Ocean Strategy Canvas for Ecotech to become a bit more focused. Clean tech is an extremely broad term, right? There are a lot of subsectors inside of that. And so trying to enact a single networking strategy for such a broad group, you're right, that's an enormous problem. And we view that as one of those ecosystem constraints to which the only solution is redefining your relationship with the constraint. And by that we mean probably it's time for Ecotech to choose those key players in its organization that really have that enormous growth potential, that let's beat Denmark potential, and focus on vertically integrating in those specific subsectors. I realize that that's the first time you've heard us say that because it didn't wind up in the presentation, but that's something that we devoted a bit of thought to, and I think that's probably the best answer we can put at the moment. So increased focus.
Regarding this point, you said that basically you want to focus because a company doesn't care when they choose to come to a place, basically. But what about innovation? Like, I mean, there's a lot of papers saying that you need like different companies to have innovation. So maybe they don't really care when they come, but when they are operating in Ecotech, like, do you just don't care about this company anymore and just say, okay, we're not going to give you any other time. We just need to focus on this stuff.
So one of the features of this organic growth concept that we're dealing with here is it's almost it's sort of the Keynes-Hayek debate, right? And we would take the Hayek side that this is not a system where you can just grab a wrench and change some needles and affect a change. So you have to make choices, right? And we can try to understand how when we do make a change, it can have some downline effects, but they're not going to always be completely predictable. And so what I'm trying to say is that we view that the more important area of focus is growth of the number of innovators in the space, and especially in Montreal. And that doesn't mean the number of members that you have, but the number of innovative thinkers that they employ, and then also entrepreneurs that can spin off companies and all this. And so when you say yes, that spillover effect, this cross knowledge, that's what causes innovation. I think the view that we've taken is that, yeah, that's one of the needles you can move that's going to have effects. But in this organic system where every change has a million other changes, it's more important to focus on attracting that talent, those innovators, those innovative companies and entrepreneurs, than it is to build up than that way. In a system where you have to make choices, attracting the innovators is more important than keeping the. You're talking about in the Blue Ocean slide, right? Then focusing our time and energy on keeping the related industries and competitors around.
All right.
It's a long answer to a short question.
No, sorry. You want to hear from that?
Okay. Well, thank you for this presentation. I like the ecosystem approach you have, but let me perhaps challenge you on this because what you recommend, in a sense, assumes like ceteris paribus, like everything else the same elsewhere. But you know, could move the other way. I mean, if something moves negative somewhere, it might actually totally counteract what you're doing on the other part of the system. What are the threats there, or did you think about this? Like, for instance, I don't know what would happen if but university policies and research and lots of these entrepreneurs come from there, and Ecotech is not, of course, subsidizing universities, but there could be perhaps moves in the other direction. I don't know, science.
Well, yeah, that's one of the issues with this ecosystem framework, where all of the relationships are in the same direction. That a negative impact has a reciprocal negative impact. Yeah, and the only answer really is yes. That's an excellent question. And I'll just stop on this one. That's why we see the role of Ecotech in tracking these relationships and moving the needle on them in the right direction as much as they can, as being one of the key strategic objectives moving forward. So yeah, the risks are there, and you're absolutely. I'm sure we could sit here and come up with 30 examples. Yes. But because Ecotech has this unique position, being in the center of it all and having some relationship with everybody, then that is one of the things that they need to focus on going forward. Is keeping an eye out for those negative organic effects and trying to change them positive when possible. Unfortunately, if you want to talk about universities, we've got some more thoughts on that. But those really need to be dealt with on an individual basis, right, as they rise. Yeah. But it's you've understood the models. Yes.
I'd like to challenge you on something else, perhaps, because you focused a lot on capabilities and supply. But of course, Ecotech has a role to play on enhancing demand in some. It's explicit in the case, for instance, in lobbying the government and trying to promote better regulations and so on.
Yeah. So we were talking. We had a few slides on public policy and regulations, which I think are here. And the biggest, some of the big barriers now we see as, if the trend continues the way it's going, a lot of these barriers that exist now, they're sort of on trend to disappear, right? As countries try to comply with the Paris Accord, the Paris Climate Agreement, there is this pressure to remove some of these barriers for clean tech industries, generally speaking. So we see that, whereas that looks like a really big challenge now, with the limited time we had, from our research, it looked like that's on trend to get better. And so devoting our limited time and resources, and also yours, is perhaps there are other areas that are more interesting to focus on.
But it's something that's going to change eventually, because everything is eventually going to be green. But of course, the transition has to be faster. And the faster the better for Ecotech, because the faster they can attract companies here. So they have to do whatever they can do to lobby as much as possible to change this legislation. I think as well, an important point here as well to point out as well, especially because we were talking a lot about the Danish. I'm from Denmark myself, so I was glad to see that it was the Danish clean is the name of the cluster the equivalent to Ecotech in Denmark. And what they're doing is, like in Denmark, is like they are very, very focused on the local capabilities that we have in Denmark. So we are focusing on what are we good at in Denmark, And I think this is maybe also something that Ecotech now has to think about, because if you look at ecotech as in a normal life cycle we did the can we take the cluster life cycle slide again? So if you look, it's a little bit of like a product as well, or when you introduce. So if you push in the beginning, you push a lot and you have a lot of focus areas because you need to attract a lot of attention, and that is what maybe ecotech has done before. And now they are in this transition phase now where they're moving in the product life cycle. So they have to now really focus in. So what ecotech now is they have to find out maybe like who are they here in Canada and what is that we can really do to provide value to the local environment that we have here in Canada. And that is of course a prioritization strategy that you have to do, which is hard. I don't want to say that you have to cut something off, but there is a prioritization, which means that something is going to be more important than other things. And yeah.
Another solution that I probably see is that, you know, as of today we see that the world is very, you know, it's into two parts. There's the 1% elite and the other huge mass of people that are deprived. So, and these are the people who have to be given the jobs, and the unions and the governments make those regulations just so that, you know, coal mines and oil and gas industry can keep on providing this employment to these people. But if we improve clean and if we become very aggressive on this middleware concept of involving the local communities to come and give their solutions to their problem. For example, in India, we see that there is an increasing trend of desertification. More and more areas are becoming dry now. And in the next 15 to 20 years, probably the area where I live, probably it won't have that, the water table will go very much down. What happens is, it is always the local people who have the best solutions. But what happens is we look at, you know, American companies or Finnish companies for solutions. So this is the very good concept of Fab Labs and Live Labs, where we can involve the local communities to give their own solutions and build a prototype. And, you know, this will also create, make it, I believe clean tech industry is a very good answer to the populist wave, because clean tech industry, if it takes off and if it involves the middleware process, you know, this will create employment as well as it will create a green climate, a green earth for all of us.
Just a question. You mentioned that you have limited time and you focused on IP. And I just had a question regarding, like, why did you choose to focus on IP? Because I think that like IP is pretty strong in Canada. Like Canadian companies don't have much trouble here. So why like the
main reason is he used to be an IP attorney.
No, but I think especially for companies within the clean tech environment, these are the companies that needs patents.
Yeah. And
patents is you know, it's something that's very important for them, because if they deliver their products to the market without having a patent, other people can go and copy it, you know. Yeah. So, and what we read is that this is really a big concern for many entrepreneurs. What is going to cost for us? You know, we don't have the knowledge of this. You know, we mentioned some examples that they can contact insurers. You know, another thing is that maybe a suggestion is that what ecotech could do is that maybe you could level up with I don't know local attorney office, law offices here in Montreal. Make these your partners, because I know I was an attorney myself. So you know, this is okay. So okay, you're doing it already. But this is because I know that this is what attorneys, they love to do that in the beginning, at least for free, because they hope that potentially they will get their customers.
But the thing is, today the companies that are existing in Canada lack of commercialization and finding the end users and the adoption. They try to find someone to adopt their technology. So it's the case for Quebec companies and any other global, international companies that I would attract here. They would ask me why, and it's not about my IP protection rights that I have here. It's whether or not I have a strong demand for clean tech here today. And the strong demand would come if we would have more regulations. That's something. or already viable solutions that speaks to an end users that needs it and see the needs of it. So, well, this is just a comment. This is actually not a question, but you may react to this because the IP, the part on the IP, for me as well, I still don't see it as one of the main barriers to grow as a clean tech cluster that fits them.
No, but it was also just more a way to make make it attractive for people to start using ecotech. That you have that this is also one of the things that you facilitate in your organization, that you also offer this to your members. As a part of maybe facilitating contracts between universities and companies it's just one part of it.
It came up originally as part of the Blue Ocean strategy formulation, right? And the concept there is that you want to uncover these hidden value-added things that are extremely important to the customer and the customer really value, but aren't traditionally seen by the industry players as being important, right? And in the research that we found, intellectual property protections is like number 3 for entrepreneurs and innovators. And so I would challenge you that perhaps in some way, whether an insurance fund or whatever is the solution or not, but in some way, convincing entrepreneurs that their patent is going to be defensible from Canada more so than it is from the US or Denmark, that's going to be something that's going to speak to them on a much deeper level than people would traditionally understand. And that's the power of the Blue Ocean strategy framework. And maybe it's wrong, but in terms of applying the research around Blue Ocean strategy and applying that model and that framework, that's what we uncovered.
No, really, it's very, very important, and that this is their main asset, the IP that they have. So of course, but really, maybe if it's only the third one, maybe the first one would be selling the thing that they have spent so much time and money to develop it.
That's absolutely true.
Other questions? Okay.
I'm intrigued by the both of your points. First of all, concerning choices that have to be made, right? I mean, we are dealing, obviously, in ecotech with a very heterogeneous cluster. It's not like a traditional cluster that, like a vertical or horizontal cluster. It's something very diverse, and some firms do not have much to do with each other in terms of technology, right? I mean, if you're in air treatment or if you're in fuel cell production, I mean, you don't have much. So, what would you recommend? I mean, if it's too diverse, you seem to suggest if it's too diverse, it's going to be hard to manage because synergies are going to be too low. If it's too, on the other hand, if it doesn't have enough diversity, then it becomes very weak and it's exposed to being challenged by So, anything to say about this?
It's interesting that a question like this is coming from an economist, right?
Yes.
Because what you're really asking is where do we find the market equilibrium? Where's the equilibrium between that trade-off? And you know what? I would love to dive into that problem. That's like a 4 mathematician problem, I think, in terms of finding the market equilibrium for that. But so the answer is that yes, there is an equilibrium point, yes. And yes, we have to find it. In terms of how, it could be another 48 hours.
Yeah, I understand. But it's still like optimal diversity, right? Yeah.
It's a really good question. I wish we thought of it earlier.
But because the world is becoming so global now, so everybody from around the world, they can start selling their products around the world now. So people, the thing is that the competition becomes higher. So people, they have to be really specialized in what they do because there's so much competition there. So we have to find out what is really our core competence, what is really that we can offer better than others, That is the question. Then there is the other question, that is the cluster, the health of the cluster, because we don't want to have 2 of the cluster anyways, because then it becomes, then the synergy effect starts to disappear. It's, I don't really have the answer to that. It's a difficult question,
For me, diversification is just not the corporate diversification. It would also include the HR, the marketing, the legal, all the perspectives. So if your cluster is well connected to all these people, to all these access nodes, and there is a good knowledge interaction between them, this is something that we would think of as, you know, a good prospect. It's a growing one. The concept of diversity has to be well defined to begin with.
So you have an incredible understanding of the way we work and the fintech sector in general, I think.
This will be the last question.
What should I do tomorrow? We're 6 of us. Those are very difficult problems to tackle and to find issues, and I don't know how to do it tomorrow.
You have to find out, you have to sit down and make a priority list. You know, you have to prioritize. You have to find out what is your priorities. Maybe that is tough. What is more easy? Maybe you can hire some more people too.
Yeah, I was about to say my resume will be in your inbox.
You know, because I think I talked with your Elisa. I think it was Elisa the other day, and she said like one of the key challenges now is that our users like that they have like that we can connect them. We can connect our developers with from the middle ground to the high ground. We can tell them we know the people from both sides, you know, in our organization. But that is what we know and what we can do now. But how can we grow now? How can we become big and still have that relation to these people? That is the challenge. I think you need to you know, hire some more people. And then be ambitious and dare to be ambitious, because you have a wonderful organization which is like it is the time now. This is the trend. Now is now to invest in this, because if you don't do it, others will do it, and